the sound quality is bad.
Yeah. It's because you stop hearing it after a while, but then you pause the video to like write something down, and then it starts again.
It's annoying. But that one is also a one that it's like a super long chapter. And also, I think that if you, except for the sound quality, I actually think that it's actually a really good video. So I wonder if there's some way I can fix that, like smooth it out somehow. I watched the whole thing yesterday as well. But I hear you. On the other hand, I'm somewhat hesitant to reshoot the whole thing.
Do you still have the original?
That is the original. I do have the original. I mean, I don't think I have the original, but I can get it back from YouTube, I believe. It seems to me that
maybe you can try to be a sound engineer or something, do something.
Yeah, exactly. But I agree with you that at first it's very annoying and then you sort of get used to it. But yeah, if you stop to write something down, I guess that comes back in. Yeah. It's just annoying because it's like that particular video, it involves like a lot of calculations and I just think that in the video they're relatively clear. But yeah, I hear you. I didn't take down my lectures with music in the background, and I just got somebody commenting, please repost without music. All right, okay, I'm recording here. All right, so there are 17 of us here. It's an intimate class today, which sort of makes sense. So this is, I only asked you guys to watch part of the next video, which someone pointed out just now. There's some sound quality issues on it. And I actually re-listened to the video myself again yesterday as well. And I agree. So as I was saying, the only thing that makes me hesitant to reshoot that video is that I actually think that except for the sound quality, it's like a pretty clear and video. Like I kind of like the way I've explained things there. And I think the calculations are relatively clear as well. Obviously, if you watched some of it, you'll realize that it's definitely the most sort of mathematically demanding part of the course yet. But yeah, so I'll maybe think about trying to do something with the video. Maybe I can, like I was saying, maybe I can try to do something with the sound without actually reshooting it, because it's just like a tick, right? So if I could just smooth over the tick, it would be fine. I guess you can't do this, but I actually listened to mine on 1.5 speed playback, and maybe that helped as well, but obviously you don't want to do that. Okay, so what are we going to do today? I didn't write down I should have done that. Let's do it right now. Get out my journal. Here, plug in my. Let me share my screen. All right, so my plan for the day is 1, I have a Kahoot on public goods. Oops, hold on 1 second. Let me just close this and reopen it, because if I plug in my tablet after I open this program, it doesn't write as well as if I plug it in before I open it. All right, so the first thing is a Kahoot on public goods. And then 2, then I guess we'll do Q&A about Romer. And it's, I realized I only asked you guys to watch the first bit of Romer, so that's fine. And then finally, I'll go over the last question of the problem set. In first problem set. All right, so that's the plan. So before we do the Kahoots, let me just mention something about public goods. So why am I talking about public goods now? It actually has a lot to do with the video or the lecture on Romer. So if you recall, what happens in the Romer model, and I believe I put this in the introduction, is that you have new varieties being invented, and the new varieties do 2 things. One of them they do is they increase production, because you have sort of a love of variety production function. So the owner, it's the way the model is set up, the owner of the variety actually gets to sort of capture that entire surplus that comes from the increase in production. But inventing a variety does one more thing in the model, which is that it decreases the cost of inventing a new variety, right? So for every new variety that's invented, the cost of getting the next variety gets lower, okay? And that part is not captured by the inventor. So I don't know how much I talked about it at the beginning of the slides for the Romer model, but the conclusion at the end is going to be that there's too little innovation from sort of a social planner's perspective, because the people that are deciding whether to invent a new variety or not, they can't capture the full social value. They don't capture the fact that it actually makes inventing further varieties cheaper. Okay, so there's this sort of public good, private good feeling to the model. Okay, so what is a public good? So we're going to talk, I'm sure you've seen this somewhere, but we're going to talk about 4 features that goods can have. They can be excludable. I maybe should say something about what a good is even. Excludable, I'm probably spelling these wrong, versus non-excludable. And they can be rival or non-rival. Okay, so what do these terms mean? Excludable is like whether you can stop someone from using something. Okay, so for instance, if what would be an example? Suppose that we're thinking about, apples on trees in a park. You know, that's it. Well, how about something simpler? Let's think about something like a meal at a restaurant. Okay, so a meal at a restaurant, the restaurant doesn't have to serve anybody who comes in a meal. They can exclude that unless someone pays for the meal. Okay, so in a sense, a meal at a restaurant is excludable. Okay, what would be an example of a non-excludable good? So a non-excludable good would be something like, let's give you a traditional example, something like, clean air. What? Did you say air?
I did, yes.
Yeah, air is an example. So air is something you can't stop someone from breathing. Okay, I mean, you, I mean, you could, but for the most part, you can't stop somebody from using the air that's just sort of in the atmosphere. Okay, so that's an example of a non-excludable good. Good here. What is a good? That's a question as well, right? A good is just something that people might desire. That's all a good is. So that's it. I'll leave it there. It could get more complicated than that, but let's just say that. Rival or non-rival. So a rival good is something that if one person is using it, others can't. So again, it might be like, you know, an apple. If I'm eating an apple, then you can't eat it. Okay, so it's like only one of us can eat an apple. Uh, Whereas a non-rival good would be something like, you know, music that's being played over some loudspeakers in a park or something. It's like I can listen to the music and you can listen to it, and the fact that you're listening to it doesn't make it less music for me. So that good is not a rival good. We can both enjoy it at the same time. Okay. So why am I talking about these things? It turns out that goods that are non-excludable and non-rival are known as public goods. Okay. And they're sort of interesting in economics because of thinking about funding for these types of goods. So for instance, if you think about like something like, having a clean atmosphere. Okay, so clean air, right? That's a traditional public good. You can't stop someone from breathing clean air. And if I'm enjoying clean air, it doesn't stop you from enjoying clean air, right? So let's think about like a particular owner of a polluting factory. Okay, so the marginal benefit that the guy gets, so let's say for Agent I, this is somebody who owns the factory. The marginal benefit that Agent I gets from polluting uh, might be higher than the marginal. I should be careful here. The marginal benefit that Agent I gets from breathing clean air, or from, yeah, exactly. Let's say that from breathing clean air, might actually be. Let me take that back. Less than the marginal cost that this Agent I might have to make his factory clean. Okay, so the benefit this one guy gets from the clean air, this owner of a polluting factory, might be less than the cost that you'd have to pay in order to make his factory clean. Because, then it's like his cost of production goes up, his profit goes down, he has to move into a smaller house, whatever. So it's like, the amount that the air gets dirtier from the pollution of this factory, it's nice, but it's just not as nice as what he'd lose if he tried to clean up his air, clean up his factory. All right. But then if we were to add up all of the marginal benefits from everybody in society, um, then that would be bigger than the marginal cost that Agent I has to pay to clean up his factory. So the idea would be that Agent I by himself, he doesn't have a strong incentive to actually stop polluting, but the social planner does have an incentive to stop Agent I from polluting. Okay, does that make sense? So the idea is that here's something that society wants, but sort of the free market won't deliver. So this is like a market failure. Public goods are often considered market failures. The free market won't deliver the thing that's socially optimal, okay, or that maximizes welfare. Okay, so any questions about that? This is the old Samuelson public good model, basically. Samuelson public good model from the 1950s. It's nothing more complicated than that. This is like the free market. And here's what's socially optimal. I mean, it's not exactly the way I'm writing here, but this is in the free market, Agent I, or you're going to have polluting factories because the owner of the factory doesn't benefit as much from cleaning up the factory as he'd lose if he were to clean up the factory. Whereas the social planner, let's just say social free market, maybe I'll just say the free market inequality that matters. And here's the social inequality. Okay. Any questions about that? Again, the way it relates to the model that we looked at is that there's sort of a socially optimal level of innovation, but it's going to be higher than the free market allocation of innovation. Forgot to set my timer here. Hold on a second. Okay, so I have like a little Kahoot. So rather than have it be about the Romer model, which I think would be better to do next time when you guys have watched the whole video, I just have a something on public goods versus private goods. I believe I just edited it. So I'm going to unshare my screen and then reshare with sound. I always forget to do that. Wow, Jenkins, World of Warcraft. The utility monster. So you notice we subtly introduced a social welfare function into that Samuelson model there. What's best for society is the thing that, you know, we add up all of the benefits across everyone to get what's best for society. And the same is true in the Romer model, actually. At the end, they talk about the socially optimal level of innovation, and there you have a social welfare function. What maximizes utility? It's a good question. I'll put that in the next Kahoot, actually. All right, give you guys another few seconds, 30 seconds. Let's do it. All right, to duplicate, because I found somebody else's version, but I edited it a bit. All right, a compact disc, a CD, is that a oh shoot, I gave you guys the low timing. Yeah, sorry, I have to go fast. Is there some way that I wonder if I can increase the time somehow without restarting? Hold on 1 second. All short. All right, guys, hold on one second. Let me see if I go to the next one, if it stays short or if it's longer now that I changed it on the Kahoot webpage. By the way, I'll just mention here, compact disc, it's rival non-excludable, right? If I'm listening, if I own a compact disc, then, you know, it's mine. You don't own it, it's mine. And it's excludable in the sense that I could see how you might say non-excludable, but it's excludable in the sense that, you know, if I'm listening to it in my own private house, then, you know, you can't listen to it. The idea. So I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to see if it actually gives you 20 seconds instead of 5 seconds. Flood control projects. No, I only get you 5 seconds. All right. Well, because the answers are all the same for all of these, I think I'm just going to go with the short times on this one. So you'll have to be very quick. But it's the good rival excludable, rival non-excludable, non-rival excludable, or non-rival non-excludable. Okay, bottom right is public good. Top left is like a standard private good, and then the others are sort of in between. Okay, so flood control projects. Let's see here. There are two possible answers. Rival non-excludable. Why is it not rival? Well, the idea would be that, you know, suppose you have a village at the bottom of a near a river, and the river floods quite often. You know, if I build a dam, everybody in the village benefits from that. Okay, and it's not like first of all, I can't stop anybody in the village from benefiting from it. And the second thing is, if one person's benefiting from the dam, then, you know, somebody else can also still benefit from the dam. So it's neither rival. Rival would be like if one person is benefiting from the dam, somebody else couldn't do it at the same time. So it's neither rival nor is it excludable. Any questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question. Now remember that it's just the same answers for every question. It's just what it is going to change up top, okay? So here it goes. Getting a haircut. What do you think? Very good. Rival excludable, right? If I get a haircut, you can't be getting a haircut at the same time. And the haircutter doesn't need to give a haircut to just anybody, right? You can't just, you know, walk by a haircutting place and just sit down unless you have the money to pay. So they can exclude you from getting a haircut. Okay. So again, same. All these questions are the same. So remember, rival excludable. What type of good is the next one? National defense. What do you think?
And the answers changed, right?
Oh, the answers change position. Okay, that's not good. Okay, so yeah, that explains why people here did the green one, rival non-excludable. This is a mess, isn't it? Hold on a second. Let me make a duplicate of this one. Let me just explain this one. So I think you guys were both right. This is a public good, right? I can't stop people from using the military. And if one person is benefiting from national defense, it doesn't stop someone else from doing it. So I think everybody actually had the right one, but the answer positions were changing there. Absolutely correct. All right, hold on one second, guys. I'm gonna go through and lengthen the times, and then we'll restart from the question that we left off on.
I have a question.
Yes, please ask it while I'm doing this.
Is the entire quiz like the same, that we get goods and we have to say what they are?
Yes.
I think that's a bit of like bachelor level. Maybe we can just like skip the Kahoot.
Okay, that's fine with me. I'm happy to skip the Kahoot. Anybody really want to do the Kahoot?
It looks like Kai has some strong feelings about it.
Okay. I'll tell you what, guys. Instead of doing the Kahoot, my bad. This was a failed Kahoot run. Let's just go through and take a look at them and just talk about the answers. And I apologize to whoever was in the top of the leaderboard here. You can't see it, but Wow Jenkins was at the top. Utility Monster was number 2, and NL was number 3 when we stopped. So I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to take you to the main Kahoot page. We'll talk about the questions and the answers. Okay, so toll bridge. Anyone want to tell me? Well, you can see the answer here. It's non-rival excludable, right? You can stop someone from going onto the bridge, but but more than one person can be on the bridge as long as the traffic is low. Okay. Busy city street. Well, that's going to be non-excludable because it's a city street. Anybody can go on the city street if they'd like to. But it is rival because if you're using the city street, you make it a little bit more congested for everybody else, and it makes it less useful for them. It changes the good that you're using. It makes it worse. All right, the HOV line, I can't actually recall what HOV stands for, but that's like the sharing. You know, if you have more than one person in your car, then you can use a particular lane on the highway, say. And if you only have one person in your car, you can't. So say 2+ only, you have to have it. Oh, what is that? Something in vehicle. I don't know, whatever. But you have to have at least 2 people in the vehicle. Okay, so what is that? Well, it's excludable, right? We're stopping people from using it. But it's non-rival because it's like the fast lane that doesn't have traffic on it, as long as it's not congested. Slice of pizza, classic rival excludable. You're eating it, nobody else can, and they can stop you from using it. Public lighthouse, it shines its light regardless of whether you paid for it or not, so it's not excludable. And it's also non-rival. If one person is able to navigate using the lighthouse, it doesn't stop anybody else from doing it. All right. Flu shot, rival excludable. Pay-per-view, that's where you have to pay for a television channel. That's non-rival, but excludable. If you're watching the paper, this is like actually a great classic example. It's like let's give it as like Netflix, right? Maybe Netflix would be better here. So, you know, because you're watching a movie doesn't stop me from enjoying watching the same movie. But Netflix can make you pay to use the service, right? So anyway, whatever, maybe I won't go through all of them, but you get the point. Soda, rival excludable. A zoo, it's excludable. You have to pay to get in, but once you're in, as long as it's not congested, the fact that you're enjoying looking at the animals doesn't stop me from enjoying looking at the animals. This one I actually changed just before the class. So Google, the way that it's set up now, it's not, you know, they don't make you pay for it. But in principle, a website could make you pay to use a search engine. So I think it's non-rival in the sense that it's almost like the opposite of non-rival. The more people use it, not the opposite, it's almost like super non-rival. It's like the more people that use it, the more useful it is. But it's in principle excludable. So, etc. And I have like 10 more of these, but I won't go for them. It's not a competition. So anyway, yeah, so I thought that might be interesting since there's a public good at the center of this model. So yeah, the public good of innovation. You can't exclude people from using your inventions to be able to invent cheaper new inventions. And also, you know, if you benefit from the technology, because then everybody can simultaneously benefit from a new idea. If you have a new idea, everybody can use the new idea. A better way of making a mousetrap, non-rival. By the way, just one, I think, I guess that, I don't know if this is undergraduate or not, but the way that people often deal with this problem that we're studying now in the Romer model is, the way the governments deal with it is that they'll make patents, right? And a patent gives you a monopoly on using an idea. You can kind of see it in the Romer model. So the idea would be, once you invent something, a new idea, it's a natural public good. It's something that anybody can use. Everybody can use it at the same time. It's just an idea. And in principle, you can't exclude people from using an idea. As long as it's sort of a public idea, people are talking about it, anybody can use it. So a patent is an attempt at making something that's non-excludable excludable, right? It's some legal way of forbidding people from using particular ideas. Okay. And if you've sort of studied the model, then you'll see that actually it's better for the social planner when those ideas are excludable, right? It's the very fact that the ideas are excludable that makes this model work at all. I mean, imagine that if somebody invented a new variety, that anybody could actually use that variety to produce, well, then there would be you would get no profit. There would be free entry into the intermediate sector in the model. So there would be zero profits. So then you would have no reason to spend the money on inventing a new idea, because you won't be able to reap the benefit. So there would be no innovation in the economy. So that's kind of a good segue to talk about the slides, or the question and answer section on the slides. I got 15 minutes until the break. So I'll pull up the slides here. Oops, why is that? Okay, any questions? Ask away.
I
have a question. Oh, Nicholas, go ahead.
Please go first.
Okay. You mentioned in your video something about like standing on the shoulder of giants as a reason for why it is that ideas get progressively easier. But intuitively, at least in like private talks, at least I always talk about with my friends, that it's harder to invent new things because more things have been discovered and the necessary information to reach the like cutting edge is larger. So what is the general justification saying that it will always get progressively easier and easier to generate new ideas instead of just having like a constant difficulty, or like even making it harder? Because presumably we will also reach some point where like all or almost all of the ideas that are possible are then explored.
That's such a funny way of thinking about the way that ideas work. So, the way I think about ideas is that the more people you have, the more ideas you have, and there's all sorts of new ways of thinking about things. I'm working in sort of maybe academia, and people coming up with new ideas and new research all the time. I don't think I mean, it's kind of, don't you think it's kind of funny to sit at, okay, so I'm gonna first, I'm going to sort of take the opposite side of your point, and then I'm gonna agree with you at the end. But let's suppose that I'm a lawyer and I'm trying to argue the opposite side of your point, that that ideas are getting harder to find. So I would say something like, imagine standing in the year 1800. What's going to happen? I mean, you could say, well, people have thought of all sorts of ideas. Everything that anybody's ever going to think of has been thought of. So, there's never going to be any, technological progress or something like that, or it's going to get harder and harder because we've already got everything, right? But actually what happened was that there was this huge industrial revolution, and you saw sort of technological growth rates, progress, whatever you want to call it. You saw it, you saw this boom, this flowering, where growth rates actually got kind of faster over that period, right? From the 19th century to the 20th century. So, it's a bit weird to stand at the end of that increase in the speed of sort of technological progress. You can, or what's the way that computer processors get faster and faster?
Moore's law.
Moore's law, yeah, exactly. Moore's law and everything, and then say, wait, but ideas are getting harder and harder to find. Well, it sure seems like, from that point of view, it sure seems like ideas are getting easier to find. So that's one way to take that side. Another way to take the side would be something like, we actually can measure growth rates, and basically what we've seen is, in the 19th century, economies grew at about 1% a year. In the 20th century, they grew about 2% a year. And in the 21st century, so far, they're growing around 2% a year. So if I want to have a model that's going to generate that, then, I need to have some sort of, way that's going to make the growth sort of continue, and the way in this model that it does that is that it's going to have this, this lower and lower cost of inventing a new variety, even though each additional variety in the economy is actually sort of less important, right? The more varieties you have, imagine production. So the more varieties we have, sort of the marginal benefit from one more variety is going down. So how do we counteract that force? In the model, it's because it's getting cheaper and cheaper to invent. Okay, so that's sort of a different type of reasoning. I'm reasoning from what I actually see, which is sort of constant growth rates, and then reasoning backward through my model to say, well, it must be that it's getting easier to invent, or else we wouldn't have the same growth rate. Okay, so there's my lawyer's attack on that idea, but go ahead.
Yeah, because I have like a response to that, I guess.
Okay,
one thing is that the model assumes a constant population.
Okay.
So since the real population is growing, then I assume that there would be more people working on generating new ideas. At least I haven't watched the whole videos, admittedly, so maybe there's like some reduction, like detrending of how many people work within the ideas field that I haven't reached yet. But
in the model,
if we have
it's
a
constant
growing
share.
But if there is a constant share and the population is growing, and then we assume that ideas are non-excludable in that sense, then
Yes.
when we have a larger share or like a larger absolute amount of people working on ideas, I would expect it to be generated if the work to idea ratio is constant, then we generate more ideas in the same time when we have more people. And because they're non-excludable, or like if they're fully public goods, then everybody gains, and then you have like still this like technological increase. And
Okay.
apart from that, do we
But wait a second.
do we have
is that a critique, or are you agreeing with me?
No, it's like a way of explaining what you're saying is like the empirical evidence without having to have a increasingly easy access to ideas, because then the amount of labor that would be required would still be like the same or increasing over time. But you still get more ideas because you just have more manpower working towards it. So like if universities start to become larger, or we have more universities and more staff working on it, then if it's harder to find ideas, they can still in aggregate generate more ideas. Do you understand what I mean?
I mean, I understand that that's
Like,
another force that in a sense would make idea creation easier, because you have more and more people working on ideas, and since ideas, as you're saying, are non-rival, then we expect to get more ideas.
And then a second question I have is, you said that the overall growth rate is 2%, or it has been 2% for the last 2 centuries, or like at least in the 21st century so far. Do we have good reason? Is that globally or like within the Western world? Because I think developing countries have an inflated growth rate probably due to capital accumulation. At least some of them have had that. And as far as I've understood it, we have kind of a like trough, at least for the last 10 years in most of the Western economies, that we've been growing slower than we wanted to.
Yeah.
And we also saw that in like the 70s, right? At least that's like what I've
I don't know about that,
what I've seen. Then
so what I kind of, the way the sort of stylized fact that people talk about that I've seen is that the growth rates are kind of constant. Like if you look at, it's a little bit hard because patenting has gone way up. Traditionally, if you want to think about sort of, so growth rates, right? You're saying you shouldn't look at developing countries because they're doing catch-up growth. It's not the same thing. We want to think about the growth of the frontier. Okay, so the technological frontier, how fast is that growing? So one traditional way you might do that is look at issuing of patents, and that has actually got quicker and quicker over time. There's way more, like the growth rate of patenting is very, very fast at the moment. But there's a question about whether patenting really reflects actual innovation, especially when you have sort of patents that are created just to sort of stifle competition. It's like the famous one about the iPad. I think it had something where it's like, because it bounced at the bottom, like when you scrolled down, it like bounced at the bottom of the page you were on. They patented that, and then they took some, like, I don't know, whatever, another operating system to court, because they also had a bounce at the bottom of their when you scrolled to the bottom of a page. Is that really innovation? I don't know. Maybe not. Okay. So patenting seems like it's no longer a good measure of innovation. So you can think about other things, right? You can think about how fast is productivity growing in terms of, say, labor productivity or something. Or you could look at, there's different measures you could use to try to tease out something about growth. And the stylized fact that I know from a paper by Nick Bloom is that growth rates are about the same now as they were, 30 years ago, as they were, 50 years ago in terms of the technological frontier. But now this is going to support your original point. The number of researchers we have working in R&D is far, far higher, both, of course, in numbers, but also even as a share of the economy, like a share of the labor force. R&D workers are a far higher share now than they were 30 years ago, and especially 50 years ago. So maybe it is true that in order to sort of get the same amount of oomph, the same amount of innovation, we need to have more and more of the population working in R&D, in research and development, in which case, maybe new ideas are getting harder to find. But I think that's still a bit of a weird, a weird way to look at it. I think if you look back, you say, oh, if I would have only been alive 50 years ago, think of all these, very simple ideas that I could have come up with that would have, revolutionized the way that we did things, because, now we know what they are. They were really easy to find back then. But I'm not so sure that's true, right? There's all sorts of new technology coming into use now. There's all sorts of new uses for things that we haven't thought of. It's hard to think about what the next thing is going to be, but I don't necessarily think it's harder to find new ideas. In fact, I think it might even be much easier to find new and useful ideas. Here's another thing. Think how different life is now than it was 20 years ago. I mean, in many ways, it's the same. You still get a haircut. But in many ways, it's not, right? Think about YouTube and the way we communicate with each other. I've got a VR headset here, which is pretty crazy. It just seems to me, even what we're doing right now, this would not have been possible 20 years ago. It seems to me that there's a lot that life is, the the way that people live is changing very quickly now. It was also changing quickly in 1910, but you know, I'm not sure if it's changing more slowly now than it was in 1910. So there's my long answer.
Okay, thank you. I still have more questions, but if Nicholas still has his question.
Yeah, let's take Nicholas's question, but now I've got I set a timer for a break. So let's I've got 40 seconds until the break. So let's just take the break now, and then afterwards we'll get Nicholas first, and then we'll go back to Kim and anybody else who's got something. Okay. So let me set the timer. Right.
David, a quick side question before the break ends, if
Sure.
you have the time for it.
Yeah, go for it.
I feel like a tacit assumption in economic models is that the new regime that we've been living under in the past 2, maybe 3 centuries is just indefinitely going to exist. Because I know there's like the Malthus model, which is like fundamentally different, but are there any models that deal with this like underlying assumption that we can infinitely scale the growth that we have right now, or like that we in some way have to hit a boundary or like an upper limit to standard of living or something like that at some point?
So the question is like, there's this old physics point that it's kind of like a gotcha, right? Where they say, wait a second, there's a limit on sort of how much we can how much we can consume, simply because there's a finite amount of resources, right? I mean, we live on the earth. It's like there's only so much in the earth. If you grow, eventually growth has to slow down. Is that kind of what you're saying or asking about?
Yeah, that like I think the idea of infinitely be able to grow, or like,
Yeah.
and it's something that's also been critiqued with climate change, because people say like you have to go beyond like the growth mindset, that you have to grow, and that's like the only measure. And then there's also like the other critique that's like that we measure growth in a bad way, or like in a inefficient way, because we measure growth for things that might not actually matter.
So I think a
So I think
provocative take on this actually is if you read a little bit about I'm going to put it in chat here. There's an economist. So of course there's something to that. Oh, there's a few things in chat. Anyway.
but that was just a sad smiley.
Okay. True, Kathy. Check out this guy and what he calls dematerialization. So I think this is a interesting and provocative sort of idea. So what he says is that, just because there's growth doesn't mean that we're using more resources. So if we look at the amount of sort of resources, physical resources per unit of, say, GDP, per dollar of GDP or whatever, it's actually going down a lot. So, even though we're consuming more goods, they're not as physical as they used to be. So, for example, if I let's see here, I don't know, let's suppose that I'm talking to you over a call like this. We didn't have to actually travel to the same place. So this is like innovation, and yet it represents a smaller use of resources than what we would have had to if we would have had to travel to a classroom. I mean, that's just off the top of my head, but of course he has a lot more insights than that. So, as long as you're talking about growth in stuff that people find useful, then it's not necessarily true that it needs to be growth in terms of resources, I guess.
Okay, I guess
at least
fair.
That's his provocative idea, at least. But yeah. Okay, so let's take the next one. Nicholas, did you have a question?
Yes, but it was more organizational kind.
Sure. Go for
regarding problem set 2.
Okay.
Because in problem set 2, we're asked to do, for the Ramsey model, 211 and 212.
Okay.
But both of them based on 210. So are we also supposed to do 210 or?
Hold on a second here. So if you look at 210,
we cannot really look at it.
Oh, you can't look at it.
I haven't checked in the book.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. it's yeah, okay. So the issue is you can't see it, because I mean they're just saying you don't have to do 210, but it says you know, they say imagine that we have a setup like this and there's this policy. So it's saying consider the same policy except for now the government is going to announce at time 0 that it's going to implement the tax at time 1. So the issue is that you guys don't have to set up. It's not that you haven't done it, it's that you don't have to set up. Is that right?
I guess so, but
Because you don't have to do
if I'm
210.
reading, for example,
Go ahead.
yeah, but if I'm, for example, reading 211a, like draw the phase diagram showing the dynamics of C and K after time t, I guess this builds up directly on 210.
Well, 210A is how does this policy affect the C dot equals 0 locus and K dot equals 0 locus? I mean, that's kind of the same as saying how does it change the phase diagram? So I guess what I'm saying is the A in 210 is the same as A in 211. It's just a different policy. Do you disagree?
All right.
Are you looking at 210?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at A in 210 says, how does this tax affect the C dot equals 0 locus and K dot equals 0 locus? Well, if you change those two locuses, that's the same as redrawing the phase diagram.
Exactly. So it's like doing 210.
It's like doing 210, but with a slightly different policy. Yeah.
All right.
So I guess my question is that something that you guys need me to upload 210? I agree that you wouldn't be able to do 211 without actually seeing the text of the problem 210.
I guess it would come like in handy, so we don't have to go to the library, etc.
Yeah, okay.
Or search for it online.
Sure. All right,
Thanks.
I'll do that. I have to write myself a notebook, so I will definitely forget.
Talking about uploading stuff, could you maybe upload the Kahoot thingy? Because there are some gray areas for the public goods and stuff, and I just want to know what your gray area is and how you define it.
Oh, okay. So you want me to upload the link to the Kahoot?
Yeah, just see the questions, just to read over them once.
All right.
I have another question about like the idea part of the endogenous growth model, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I think that there's like this push and pull effect in entrepreneurship and like innovation. Or at least that's something that I've heard, where like one of the reasons for why Denmark is such a great place to start new businesses and have new ideas is like the social security net. So like that, it's not the ups of new ideas, so like not the general profit you can get from generating new ideas, but the ability to lose a lot if you don't generate something. Do you understand what I mean by that? Like if
sure.
I want
Being an
to become an
entrepreneur is
idea
risky.
generator,
Mhm.
yeah, or like an idea generator or something like that. Are there any endogenous growth models that include that facet? Because this one is more like you hire people to be idea generators, but that doesn't really include a risk component in terms of both going up and down for those people because they just get a wage, right?
Right. So you're saying that this is this model is more like you open an R&D section at your firm, where you're paying them a wage. Whereas you're saying that there's another style, which is I'm going to start a business with my buddies, and that could work out or it might not work out, and it's risky.
Yeah, and that has at least I think that has a very large impact on like the rate of idea generation, and like the amount of people who can go into like unique takes of R&D, so that it's not incremental. So it's not like making an LCD screen that has more pixels or something like that, which takes a lot of money, right? To have R&D for that, but instead like trying out unique things.
Yeah, Uber or something.
You know,
So
yeah, opening Amazon in your garage and stuff.
yeah. So I mean, That's an interesting theory, and I don't actually know. I don't know this literature well enough to know where that fits. I think that if you were to take that empirically, I don't think it's going to do well. And the reason why is because I think that a lot of innovation is being done in places now where they don't have good social safety nets. So that would be, say, the United States and like China. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but and maybe there's some theory on it, but my sort of first, my snap take is that it's not going to do well in the data. If you were to compare innovation across countries, let's see here. So, let's say the UK has smaller. Yeah. Okay. So let's think about it one step more, right? How is that social safety net funded? Okay. So the way the social safety net might be funded is through taxing, and often sort of progressive taxation. So if I think that I'm going to have, like, I might be very, very wealthy, maybe I don't want to actually innovate in Denmark. There's the flip side, right? Like, the upside isn't as up. The downside isn't as down, but the upside also isn't as up. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's like that's why it's like a trade-off, right? That if it's like the push or pull, I call it push and pull, or I don't think that's like the right terminology, but like that there are two factors to consider, like the upside and the downside, right?
Right.
And at least I've heard somewhere that like maybe it's not only the upside, so people aren't entirely self-centered in terms of like I want to get rich and that's why I want to innovate. I think open source projects and like university research are two very wide examples of like people who innovate or make new ideas with no prospects of actual profit in that sense.
That's true. Those are other models.
Fair enough.
Interesting. Any other questions about this, guys? And yeah,
I have a question regarding the growth of Y
Okay.
at slide 15. And how that transfers into the growth rate of the profit on slide 17. Could you maybe explain like the connection between those?
Sure. Growth rate of Y here, we're good with this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because A is the only thing growing, right?
A is the only thing growing, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. So first of all, are we okay here? So this is saying that the producer of good I at time t, their profit is going to look like this. And this part is sort of the easy part. So this is their unit. This is like their unit profit. This is because here's their markup minus their costs. Their markup over their costs. So this is their profit per good sold. Right. And recall that behind this whole thing, there's a production function that says that a unit of labor is equal to a unit of output, of intermediate output, right? So exactly. So for each unit that's sold, how much does that cost to produce? The wage. Okay. And what are we charging? Well, we're charging 1 divided by phi times the marginal cost. So this is the price. So this is like our profit per unit sold. Okay. Yeah, that was probably, I kind of explained that a bit backwards. Let me write it down so we don't get confused. Okay, so behind this whole thing, I can't write here, can I? I can use this. Okay, so we have a production function in the background that goes like this. Q is equal to L, or if you like, QI, the quantity produced of good I, is equal to Li, the amount of labor that's been hired by I. Okay, so we're asking, what is the profit? Well, our profit is going to be our revenue of I minus cost of I. Okay, so what is the revenue of I? Well, it's going to be the price that I is charging times the quantity that they produce. Okay, minus the cost. What is the cost? Well, it's going to be the wage. I guess I don't need an I on wage, but I can't erase it now because, oh yeah, this. Okay. So it's the wage times the amount of labor that I hire. So labor is the only factor of production in this model. So we get that. All right, now I'm going to do a trick, right? I said that we have this production function that quantity is just labor, right? So I can actually just do PI times LI minus W times LI. Okay, keep going. Let's take this Li out in front. Li is equal to Pi minus W. Okay, now on a different slide, I derived that the price that I charges is going to be a markup times I's marginal cost. Okay, so we can replace that as well. So here we get W divided by phi minus W. Okay, so we're almost there. So you can see this is starting to look a lot like this equation. Maybe I should write profit here. Profit of I is revenue minus cost. Okay, so what's the last thing we have to do? How do we get from Li here to this expression? Well, take a look at what this is. This is the total amount of labor in the economy minus the amount of labor that's working in R&D. So this is like the production sector, the set of workers, the number of workers that are working in the production sector of the economy, not in the research part of the economy. Okay, so that's what's on top. And then we're dividing by A. Why are we dividing by A? Because there's A different varieties. Okay, so since every single intermediate producer is the same, we can just look at the average amount of labor per intermediate good producer. That's what this thing is. And that's actually exactly how much they hire, right? Everyone is the same, so everybody gets exactly the same number of workers. So actually you can write Li is equal to the total amount of production workers here divided by the total amount of intermediate good producers, or the total amount of varieties. All right, so this is the profit rewritten in this way. Now let's see here, what do we do? This is just a little manipulation. You can see we have a 1. We have to multiply and divide by phi here. Phi divided by phi, right? And then you can get 1 minus phi divided by phi times wages times this part that's outside here. So that's how we get, that's just some algebraic manipulation. Okay. Then we've got the very last step, and you say, how do we get from this thing? How do we know how fast wages are growing?
But I feel like maybe the last part is resulting from the growth of Y, right? More than from the above.
Well, I mean,
but I'm not sure that's correct though. That's just how
we have A that's growing and we have wages that are growing, right? So if I go back one slide now, no, I can't do it here. Okay, let's go back.
The thing that I'm trying to figure out is the 1 minus phi divided by phi in front of BLA. No, so below. Is that resulting from the fact from above or from the growth rate of Y?
This is resulting from...
It's kind of relevant for the...
I see.
For the profit set.
So, I mean, these things here are just numbers, and these are just numbers and equilibrium objects these are just numbers. Okay, so these things aren't changing as the economy is growing. L bar is fixed, and we've assumed that LA is fixed as well in equilibrium. 1 minus phi is just a number. Phi is just a number. So really what we have to look at is what is the growth rate of W divided by A. And I'm claiming here that it's this, okay? So, you know, if you have something that's growing that's a ratio like this, it's going to be the growth rate of W divided by the growth rate of A. So I suspect what we have here is the growth rate of W. So I suspect this is growth rate of W. And I suspect this thing here is the growth rate of A, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the growth rate of the wages, I believe, is.
But what you note as the growth rate of wages is exactly equal to the growth rate of Y on slide 15.
Exactly, but I think I discussed on either slide. I think I discussed on slide 16. Why the growth rate of wages is the same as the growth rate of Y.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah, I just needed to make sure that like the 1 minus phi over 5 in the bottom line is not depending on what's above, because that changes in the problem set without saying too much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I get it. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's nice.
Yeah, all that stuff on the line above is just, these are just constants, so they don't grow at all. Yeah. So really, we're just going to go through that. Yeah. Exactly.
Thanks.
Let me actually just get rid of all this stuff, and then I can look at the last page. Yeah, so we want to say that wage grows at the same rate as output. Why is that? Final sector pays all revenues to intermediate sector, of course, because it's perfect competition. And the constant markup implies a fixed revenue fraction paid to workers. Yeah, because the markup is just over marginal cost, and the only factor is labor.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Any other questions about the first part of the slides? Okay. If there's no questions, then I'm going to move on to the last thing we're going to do today, which is just finish the last question from the first part of the problem set, or the first problem set. All right. Sorry, do I have a... Let me quick see. I'm just going to check and see here if I have the... I can't remember if I copied the problems. I did. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about 110 here. This question asks you to use a solo style model to investigate some ideas that have been discussed in the context of Thomas Piketty's research work. Consider an economy described by the assumptions of the solo model, except that factors are paid their marginal products. Okay, and labor income is consumed and all other income is saved. So I'll tell you, a couple things to note before we even start this. So I think I mentioned last time that you can probably find that there's an answer key out there somewhere where they go through the answers to these questions, but they do it in a very mathematical way. And I think it's not really necessary. I think you can kind of just explain at least ABC in without really doing any math, just with some argumentation. And then part D, I feel like there should be some way to do it, with just argumentation, especially since they say describe the qualitative behavior over time of this share of net capital and net output. But I couldn't think of the intuitive way to do it quickly enough. So I'm going to show you guys the just the way you can figure out by directly calculating. But anyway, so that's that. So let's jump in. Okay, so the first part A says, show the properties of the production function and our assumptions about the behavior of L and A imply that the capital output ratio K divided by Y is rising if and only if the growth rate of K is greater than N plus G. That is, if and only if little k is rising. Okay, so let's put here. All right. So this is 110, part A. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna write this out. Suppose, let's just give it a name. Let's suppose K is growing at rates GK, all right? We're just gonna name the growth rate there. K divided by Y is constant if Y is growing at GK, right? So if K is growing at GK, well, then K divided by Y is gonna be constant if and only if Y is also growing at GK, right? Now, we know that Y is equal to F of K A L, okay? So let's just say is constant returns to scale. So Y is growing at GK only if, really if and only if, AL is growing at GK, right? You know, because Y is constant returns to scale, the only way that Y can be growing at GK is if AL and K are both growing at the rate GK. Okay. If AL is growing slower than GK, Y will also grow slower than GK, and vice versa. Right, so if AL is growing faster than GK, then Y is going to grow faster than GK if K is growing in K. Okay. Now, since AL grows at N plus G, now what did I write? If GK greater than N plus G, okay, if GK is greater than N plus G, then it means Y is growing slower, so it means then K divided by Y is, let's see here, is growing. If GK less than N plus G, then K divided by Y is falling. Did I need to say anything else? If and only if the growth rate of k is greater than n plus g. That wasn't a very formal proof. Let's see. Can I do an if and only if? Where did I say only if? Let's say if and only if here. If and only if. That's it. Any questions about that? Okay. Now, how do I do a new page here? Page 1 of 1. Okay, so then let's move on to the next question. Flip back to the problem. Okay, assume the initial conditions are such that the derivative of y with respect to k at t equals 0 is strictly greater than n plus g plus delta. Describe the qualitative behavior of the capital output ratio over time. For example, does it grow or fall without bound? Gradually approach some constant level from above or below something else? Explain your reasoning. Okay, again, somewhat informally, let's start with this graph. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think formally we really need to think about the slope of this thing. Let's see here. Let's call this f of little k. So what is the slope of f of little k with respect to little k? You just called that f prime of k. Sorry, I'm confusing myself a little bit here because what we actually have is the condition dy dk is greater than n plus g plus delta plus g plus delta. So what I want to say is that that's going to imply that the slope of this line here at 0 is steeper than the slope of this straight line, which means that we're going to be in the area where we're growing. A level of capital is growing, and it's going to grow up to the point, I should say the capital output ratio is going to be growing up to the point where we get to the steady state. So it's going to grow, and then it's going to eventually sort of slow down, and then we're eventually going to get to our steady state. But I seem to be missing there's a little gap here. So let me quick see here. So we have this condition. So in other words, we still have this condition as well. Times f of little k dk. Greater than n plus g plus delta. Right, because this thing here is the same as y. We've just divided both of the arguments in the Cobb-Douglas production function by AL. But it's not divided by, it's times. And then that's going to be it. This should be times. Okay, so just to say it over here, suppose we've got y is equal to f of k al. Then we can multiply both sides by al divided by al. Here we're going to get al divided by al. We can take this bottom one, put it in here. We're going to get al times f of k divided by al. 1 is equal to al little f of little k, right? Okay, so that's what I've done here. Now this al, I can actually it's a constant, so I can take it out in front. I'm trying to get to f prime. So I need to have, we need to be dividing by, we need to be taking this with respect to k divided by al. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. I think this is going to be it. I'm probably confusing everybody right now, but it doesn't feel as times df of k. Did I do that right? Let's see here. Yeah. It's greater than n plus g plus delta. Okay, so here I have df of little k. Here I have d little k. Here I have d little k, d big K. So I've got al d little k, d big K times f prime of little k is greater than n plus g plus delta. All right, so let's write out the definition of little k. K divided by al dk. Prime of little k greater than the same thing. Okay. Yeah, now check this out. We're going to get al divided by al, right? Because dk divided by al dk is just 1 divided by al times f prime of little k greater than n plus g plus delta. This thing cancels out, and then we can show this. So as you can tell, I didn't actually, I didn't originally do this in my little solution that I drew up before class, but the point is that if this condition is true, then it actually implies that this is true. F prime of little k is greater than n plus g plus delta, which means that the slope here of this top line is steeper than this line here, okay? Which means that we're on this part of the graph, okay? So it means that we're sort of going to be approaching the equilibrium from the bottom. Let me see here. Well, I guess it depends a little bit on where we start, but anyway, we're going to be going this direction up until some point where our capital output ratio is going to be constant, where capital is going to grow at the same rate as labor and technology. And if we start above this point, then we're going to be going this direction. I guess they didn't actually say here in this problem. It says, assume the initial conditions are such that dy dk at t equals 0 is strictly greater than n plus g plus d. Okay, so that's what we're arguing here, that this top line is going to be steeper at 0. So it's going to look kind of like this. We have a Cobb-Douglas production function. So yeah, so we're all good. Exactly. So does it grow or fall without bounds? Let's answer the question. Okay. C graph that little f of k is steeper than n plus g plus delta at t equals 0. So the capital output ratio will rise since little k is rising to the left of little k's steady state level. And fall to the right. Okay, and why is that? Because we know from the last question that the capital output ratio is rising when little k is rising, and it's falling when little k is falling. Okay. So that was a somewhat confused answer because I confused myself with this thing here. But yeah, the whole point is that this the derivative of output with respect to capital implies that the derivative of the intensive form of output with respect to little k is also greater than n plus g plus delta. So that was a bit of a messy answer, but that is the answer. Any questions about that one? Okay. All right, part C. Many popular summaries of Piketty's work describe his thesis as, since return to capital exceeds the growth rate of the economy, the capital output ratio tends to grow without bounds. By the assumptions in part B, this economy starts in a situation where the return to capital exceeds the economy's growth rate. If you found in B that k divided by y grows without bound, explain intuitively what's the driving force. Alternatively, if you found in B that k divided by y does not grow without bound, explain intuitively what is wrong with the statement that the return to capital exceeding the economy's growth rate tends to cause k divided by y to grow without bound. Okay, this one is what we can do in words. All right. The rate of return to capital is not independent of the capital output ratio. All right. In particular, so first of all, let's write this. In particular, we found that the rate of return is equal to f prime of little k. Okay. In steady state, f prime of little k, maybe I shouldn't have said it quite that way. Yeah, that's not going to answer the question to say that. So let me say, if little k 0 is less than little k star, then the capital output ratio is growing. And little k is growing. Since f double prime is less than 0, r is falling. So we expect that the return to capital will fall. Okay. Is that what we need to say? Explain intuitively what is wrong with the statement that the return to capital exceeding the economy's growth rate tends to cause k divided by y growth outbound. Okay, so moreover, k divided by y will eventually converge to its steady state level. Okay. So the rate of return is not constant, it's falling. Even if the capital to output ratio is growing, eventually we know it's going to asymptote to its steady state level. So, yeah. So that's that. Questions about that one? Okay, the last one, it says, suppose f is Cobb-Douglas and that the initial situation is as in part B. Describe the qualitative behavior over time of the share of net capital income, that is this thing, in net output, that's that thing. Intuitively, what is this? This is R, right? Minus delta. Actually just derives that this is equal to the rate of return. So the rate of return minus delta. Yeah, that's the amount of net investment there is in the economy, or net capital income there is in the economy, I should say. And then here it's the total output minus the amount of capital that depreciates. So it's like, yeah, I mean, that's what it is, net output minus depreciation. And then it says, describe the qualitative behavior over time of the share of this one to that one. And I tried to think about sort of like an intuitive reason, kind of like the arguments I made in A, B, and C, to argue that this ratio is falling. But I couldn't think of anything intuitive. So I ended up just doing it with math. So I hope that's okay. That's what I'm going to do. All right. So this one, I'm going to look at my notes here. Okay. So let's just write out, I'm going to drop all the t's just because we have a lot of t's. F prime of little k. Okay, so this is something that I have shown up here, that the derivative of output with respect to capital is the same as the derivative of little, or as f prime of little k. Okay. Minus delta divided by y minus delta k. All right, so we want to see, how does this thing here change over time? Okay. So first, let's just simplify this a little bit. So let's rewrite it as, we're going to divide both the top and the bottom by y. So we're going to get, by al. So we're going to get little k times f prime of little k minus delta. Then here we get little y minus delta times little k. Now, since we know we're Cobb-Douglas, let's plug in the definition of f prime of little k for the Cobb-Douglas production function. That's alpha times little k to the power alpha minus 1 minus delta divided by y minus delta k. Okay. Okay. Now let's just do a little manipulation. Multiply through alpha times little k to the power alpha minus delta times little k divided by y minus delta k. All right. We know that, actually, in fact, let me just do one more substitution here so I don't have to redo this, but we know that little y is equal to k to the power alpha when the production function is Cobb-Douglas. So you get this thing. Okay, now look at that. We've got a little k kind of in each of these terms. So let's just divide through by a little, let's divide through by k to the power alpha. So we're going to get alpha on the top and the bottom. Delta little k 1 minus alpha. And here, 1 minus delta k to the 1 minus alpha. Okay. So that's that. Now, what we want to know is, how does this thing change over time? So let's take the derivative of this thing with respect to time. Okay, so now I'm going to do derivative of that thing with respect to time. Right. So that's going to equal I see. Okay, alpha all right. Just do it up here. 1 minus alpha times delta k to the power negative alpha divided by 1 minus delta k 1 minus alpha. That's the first term. Minus okay. Actually, there's 2 minuses here. Let's do a plus. Oh, okay. Sorry. This is actually, let's do this that. There's a minus in front, so let's make that alpha minus 1. Okay. And then here, it's going to be alpha minus delta little k plus k 1 minus alpha divided by 1 minus delta little k to the power 1 minus alpha squared. Then the derivative of this thing It's going to be negative, positive alpha minus 1 times delta to the power a little k, negative alpha. Okay. Let's collect terms. Let's see here. This is going to be, let's multiply the numerator and the denominator here by 1 minus delta little k to the power 1 minus alpha. So we're going to get 1 minus delta k to the power 1 minus alpha. Divided by squared times alpha minus 1 delta k with negative alpha. Okay. Plus alpha minus delta k 1 minus alpha. All right, interesting. Okay, so this is the same for both of these terms. Okay. The only difference is these two things. All right, and let's see here. This is getting extremely complicated, and I feel like I missed something because I didn't have the k dots. Okay. This calculation is missing something. There should have been a k dot here, right? Because ultimately we're taking the derivative not with respect to little k, but with respect to little t. So there should be a k dot there. There should be a k dot here. Should be a k dot here. Should be a k dot here. So we need to know the sign. Positive, negative, positive. So the sign is, this whole thing is negative. And up here we have this thing that I don't know the sign of, negative. This didn't work. All right, guys. Let me scratch this calculation here, this one right here. I apologize for this. And let me actually take it from this step here. I think it would have been easier to take the derivative from this step rather than from this one, rather than from that one. This one made a big mess, and I actually don't quite, there's something, I think I maybe made a mistake here while I was doing that. So let me scratch this one. Let's try one more time. But I'm going to try here from this step rather than that step. I add a page. Let's start from here. Take the derivative of alpha little k to the alpha minus delta little k. I used to really get annoyed with my professors who do this, by the way. So we have to do this. And this time it's going to be easier. It'll be alpha squared k to the power alpha minus 1 times k dot, don't forget that this time, minus delta k dot divided by little k alpha minus delta little k. Okay, now we're going to have plus, oh, let's do minus. I confuse myself here. Don't skip any steps. All right, alpha, k alpha minus delta k divided by k alpha minus delta k squared times alpha, oops, not squared, alpha times little k, alpha minus 1 minus delta little k, dot minus delta little k dot. Okay. Now, first of all, note, okay, so check this out. On top we have we have almost the same thing. Here we have alpha squared, I mean, here we have alpha k, alpha minus 1 k dot. Here we have alpha squared, the same thing, k dot, okay. And here we have delta k dots. So what can we do? All right, I am clearly confusing myself here. So let me let's take a short break, and then I'm gonna work this out rather than making you guys all sit around and watch me work it out. And then I will come back and finish it in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. Oh, jeez, that's it. Okay, so let me, am I sharing the right screen? Share the right screen here. So I'm actually not going to finish this one now. So what happened, in case, you know, to explain what's the problem, in my notes when I solved this one a few days ago, I did something that I shouldn't have. So I took this thing here and I said, oh, I can cross out the top and I can cross out the bottom. And then I sort of went on from this step. And you can see that the top here isn't the same as the bottom. So I made a mistake in my sort of solutions that I prepared. And thinking on my feet here is clearly not the right way to do it. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully solve this again, and then I'll put out a video on the YouTube channel with the solution of this problem. And that way I won't further confuse everyone, including myself, by trying to work backwards on the spot. So so anyway, that's 1.10 part A, B, and C. I think that all looks okay. But part D, clearly I kind of muffed that one up, and I'll put out a video a little bit later today with the solution to that one. So anything else that I can say about the chapter or anything else generally before we wrap up for today? I can see we only have like 7 people left. I'm sure I confused everyone in the intro. No. Okay, so sorry about that, but I'll put out a video a little bit later with the solution to 110 part D, and yeah, and then for next week, just the rest of the Romer chapter on the endogenous growth model, and I'll see you then. Thanks.
Have a good week. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.